Arthur Sterling adjusted his silk tie in the mirror, scrutinizing his reflection not for flaws, but for the reassurance of his own absolute superiority. At 60, he wore his age like his Italian suits, expensive, tailored, and intimidating. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Gold Coast penthouse, Chicago was bracing for a Thanksgiving blizzard. The city was a sprawling grid of gray steel and white snow, but in here, the air was filtered, scented with cedar, and maintained at a perfect 68 degrees. He turned to the side, checking the silhouette that would soon be broadcast to millions. The tailor left a crease in the shoulder, Arthur muttered, brushing a speck of non-existent dust from his lapel. I told you, Vanessa. You can't hire these new shops. They lack heritage. They lack focus. Vanessa Sterling, seated on a velvet chaise lounge, didn't look up from her tablet. The stock is up 2 points in anticipation of the interview, Arthur. Nobody cares about a crease except you. She was 40, beautiful in a sharp, manufactured way, and cared about the Sterling legacy only insofar as it funded her lifestyle. Just make sure you don't say anything controversial tonight. The board is watching. Arthur poured himself a glass of single malt scotch, the amber liquid swirling against the crystal. Controversy? No. I'm simply going to tell the truth. About the pure path. About how standards have dropped in this country, because we've allowed our foundations to be diluted. He glanced at a framed photo on his desk, not of family, but of his first factory. To build something lasting, you have to cut away the weak materials. I learned that the hard way. 3 miles south, the wind didn't politely tap against glass. It howled through the cracked brickwork of the Southside tenements. Marcus Hayes pulled his collar up against the biting cold as he stepped off the ambulance. His shift was over, but his work wasn't. Careful now, Mrs. Gable, Marcus said, his voice a low, gentle rumble as he took the heavy grocery bags from the trembling hands of his neighbor. The elderly woman beamed at him, her breath puffing in the frigid air. You're a good boy, Marcus, she said, patting his arm with a gloved hand. Working all day, saving lives, and still carrying an old lady's turkey up 3 flights of stairs. Ideally, we don't want you slipping on the ice before the pumpkin pie is served, Marcus joked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He was tall, with broad shoulders built for carrying the weight of others, yet his presence was calming, void of the aggression that fueled the city's business district. He entered his own apartment a few minutes later, greeting the wave of warmth that smelled of sage, roasting pecans, and history. It was a small space, cluttered with books and mismatched furniture, but it felt alive. Elena Hayes was in the small kitchen, humming along to an old jazz record, her hands dusted with flour. Cornbread stuffing? Marcus asked, leaning against the doorframe, exhaustion finally settling into his bones. It wouldn't be Thanksgiving without it, Elena smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. She saw the fatigue in his eyes, the shadow of a young man who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. Rough shift. Cold, Marcus admitted. And loud. Everyone seems angry today. He didn't mention the billboard he'd passed downtown, the one with the face of a white billionaire looming over the city like a god, preaching about purity. He didn't tell her how much it stung to see the father who had discarded them treated like a hero. Elena seemed to read his mind. She walked over and placed a warm hand on his cheek. Let them be angry. We have food on the table and love in this house. That's a wealth they'll never understand. Back in the penthouse, the blue light of evening was settling over the city. Arthur finished his drink, the warmth of the alcohol fueling his conviction. He walked to the window, looking down at the ants crawling on the streets below. Tonight was the night. He would finally rewrite the narrative, erasing the mistake of his first marriage, the shame of having mixed his blood with someone like Elena. He would frame it as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of his company. Are you ready? Vanessa asked, standing up and smoothing her dress. Tonight, I bury the past for good, Arthur whispered to the empty room, unaware that the past was about to arrive with a siren and a stretcher. We have just seen 2 very different worlds, the cold, lonely penthouse of a billionaire and the warm, loving home of a paramedic. If you value these deep details and are ready for the next chapter, please kindly comment the number 5 below. It tells me you are tuning in. Also, make sure to subscribe to the Black King channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss a moment of inspiration. Your engagement helps us continue creating great content for you. Now, let's return to the story. The studio lights of Channel 8 were blindingly bright, but Arthur Sterling's smile was ice-cold as the on-air sign flashed red. He sat opposite Diana Chin, the city's toughest interviewer, looking every inch the titan of industry. His posture was rigid, a statue carved from privilege and unshakable confidence. The audience sat in hushed reverence, captivated by the man who claimed to have built an empire from sheer will. Your memoir, The Pure Path, speaks extensively about trimming the fat to achieve excellence, Diana began, her eyes scanning her notes. But there is a chapter missing, Mr. Sterling. There have long been rumors of a marriage before Vanessa. A child born 28 years ago. Why is this part of your history erased? Arthur didn't flinch. He had anticipated this. It was the moment he had rehearsed in front of his mirror. History is written by the victors, Diana. And frankly, some history is best left in the dustbin. Miles away, inside the idling cabin of Ambulance 17 parked near the river, the radio broadcast played softly. Jack, a young paramedic with messy hair and an earnest face, turned up the volume. Hey, isn't that the guy from the billboard? The one who owns half the city. Marcus stared straight ahead at the snow swirling in the headlights, his grip on the steering wheel tightening until his knuckles turned ashen. Turn it off, Jack. Wait, listen, Jack insisted. He's talking about family. On the screen, Arthur leaned forward, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper that millions leaned in to hear. Let's be honest, Diana. We live in a world that pretends all ingredients are equal. They aren't. Mixing oil and water was a youthful error on my part. I needed a legacy of strength, of intellect. Not laziness. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. The studio audience gasped, the sound rippling through the room. Diana looked stunned. Are you implying that your first wife and son were lesser? I'm saying that to save the organism, you must cut off the dead weight, Arthur declared, a smirk playing on his lips as he delivered the line he believed would vindicate him. I refuse to let my company be dragged down by genetic mediocrity. I chose purity. In the ambulance, Jack looked at Marcus, his jaw dropping as the implication of the racist dog whistle landed. Did he just say what I think he said? Marcus didn't answer. A vein pulsed in his temple, the only sign of the fury boiling beneath his calm exterior. Back in the studio, Arthur basked in the shock of the room, mistaking the silence for awe. He reached for his water glass to toast his own bravery. But as his fingers touched the crystal, a sledgehammer of pain slammed into the center of his chest. The smirk twisted instantly into a mask of agony. His vision blurred, the bright lights stretching into terrifying streaks of white. The water glass slipped from his numbness fingers, shattering on the polished floor with a sound like a gunshot. Arthur clutched his chest, his mouth opening in a silent scream as the world tilted sideways. He pitched forward, collapsing face first onto the stage he had dominated only seconds before. Screams erupted from the audience. Diana jumped up, shouting for help. As the dispatcher's voice crackled, code blue at Channel 8 Studios, victim is a male, 60s. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind. He knew exactly who was dying on that stage. Chaos didn't look like panic. It looked like a circle of expensive suits watching a man die, terrified of ruining their Italian leather shoes. When Marcus burst through the heavy studio doors, his medical bag heavy on his shoulder, the scene was a tableau of paralyzed privilege. Arthur Sterling lay motionless on the polished floor, his face an ashen gray that clashed violently with the vibrant studio backdrop. Make way. Paramedics. Jack shouted, clearing a path through the frozen onlookers. Marcus moved with the efficiency of a man who had seen death 1,000 times. He knelt beside the body, his knees hitting the hard floor with a thud. But before he could touch the patient, a shrill scream cut through the noise. No, not you. Vanessa Sterling threw herself between Marcus and her husband, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and disgust. She looked at Marcus's dark skin, his uniform, and sneered. I demanded a specialist. Get away from him. I won't let one of you people touch him with those dirty hands. We need a real doctor, not some affirmative action hire. The racism was naked, ugly, and loud. The studio fell silent. Even in the face of death, the prejudice that Arthur had cultivated held its ground. Marcus froze for a microsecond, the insult stinging like a lash. He looked down at the man who had called him a mistake minutes ago, and then up at the woman protecting that legacy of hate. "Ma'am," Marcus's voice boomed, deep and authoritative, drowning out her hysteria. "Step back or you will be removed. He has no pulse, and in 30 seconds, he will be dead permanently. Jack, get her back," Marcus ordered. Jack, usually mild-mannered, stepped forward and physically walled Vanessa off, using his body as a shield. "Let him work, lady, or you're going to be a widow before the commercial break ends." Marcus turned his focus entirely to the patient. He grabbed the lapels of Arthur's $5,000 custom silk shirt, the symbol of the purity Arthur cherished, and ripped it open. Buttons scattered across the floor like worthless coins. He exposed the pale, vulnerable chest beneath, stripping away the billionaire to reveal the failing human. "Pads on," Marcus commanded, his movements precise. He applied the defibrillator pads to the skin that had always recoiled from his own. The monitor wailed a flatline tone that grated against the nerves. "Charging. Everybody clear." He hovered his hands over his father's chest. For a fleeting second, he wasn't a paramedic. He was the boy left out in the cold. He held the power of life and death over the man who had wished him unborn. It would be so easy to hesitate, to let nature take its course, to let the dead weight sink. But Marcus Hayes was not his father. "Clear," he shouted, pressing the button. Arthur's body jerked violently as the electricity surged through him, an artificial kickstart to a frozen heart. Marcus watched the monitor, breath held. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then beep, beep, beep. A chaotic, struggling rhythm appeared on the screen. Marcus exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "We have a pulse. It's weak, but it's there. Let's move him now." Arthur gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of air. His eyelids fluttered, struggling against the darkness. As the fog cleared, his vision focused on the face hovering inches above his own. As the pulse returned, weak and thready, Arthur's eyes locked onto Marcus with a look of terrified recognition. He wasn't just looking at a paramedic. He was staring directly into the eyes of the son he had called a mistake only moments ago. Marcus just proved that true dignity stands tall even in the face of hate. If you are still watching and see the value in this detailed storytelling, please comment the number 8 below. And if you aren't part of our family yet, I recommend you subscribe to Black King and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Your support is vital for us to keep creating amazing content that inspires you. Now, let's continue. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only honest sound in the room. Everything else, the flowers, the get-well cards, even his wife's smile, felt manufactured. It was Thanksgiving morning, but the cardiac ICU at St. Jude Hospital smelled only of antiseptic and floor wax, a sterile purgatory far removed from the holiday warmth. Arthur Sterling lay in the bed, stripped of his Italian suit, his dignity replaced by a thin hospital gown and a chest that felt like it had been kicked by a mule. Vanessa was pacing by the window, the sharp click-clack of her designer heels on the linoleum acting as a drill against Arthur's headache. She wasn't looking at him. She was glaring at her phone. "The board is panicking, Arthur," she hissed, lowering her voice slightly as a nurse passed by. "Your little stunt on TV cost us 12% in pre-market trading. 12%. And this hospital, it's too urban. I've already called for a transfer to Sinai, but the doctors say you're too unstable to move." Arthur watched her, a strange clarity washing over him. He had almost died yesterday. He had felt his soul slipping away. And his wife was worried about stock options and zip codes. He closed his eyes, recalling the sensation from the ambulance, the feeling of strong, calloused hands pressing life back into his ribcage, hands he had recognized. "Mr. Sterling?" A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Nurse Betty, an older black woman with eyes that had seen everything, adjusted his foredrip. She moved with a quiet grace that contrasted sharply with Vanessa's frantic energy. "Your vitals are stabilizing. You're a lucky man." "Lucky?" Arthur rasped, his throat dry. "Blessed is more like it," Betty corrected, ignoring Vanessa's impatient sigh. That young paramedic fought for your life like you were his own kin. Most folks wouldn't have bothered after the things you said on that stage. But he stayed right here until you were stable. Arthur turned his head. Through the glass partition of his room, he saw movement at the nurse's station. A tall figure in a dark uniform was signing paperwork. The broad shoulders, the calm posture. It was him. Marcus. Vanessa followed his gaze and sneered. Is that him? The affirmative action hero? I should sue him for bruising your chest. Get out, Arthur whispered. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me. Leave the room, Vanessa. Now. His voice was weak, but the command was unmistakable. Stunned and offended, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking furiously down the hall. Arthur raised a trembling hand, tapping on the glass. Marcus looked up. Their eyes locked, one pair filled with guilt and confusion, the other dark and unreadable. After a hesitation, Marcus entered the room. He didn't come close. He stood near the door, his heavy boots silent on the floor, a stark contrast to the noise Vanessa had made. You. Arthur started, his voice cracking. He wanted to say, son. He wanted to say thank you. He wanted to explain why he had been so afraid of this moment for 20 years. Marcus cut him off, his face a mask of professional detachment. I did my job, Mr. Sterling. Same as I would for anyone. Don't read into it. You saved me, Arthur insisted, tears pricking his eyes. After what I said. I took an oath, Marcus said simply, reaching for the door handle. And unlike some people, I don't break my promises just because it's inconvenient. Watching his son's broad back disappear down the hallway, Arthur realized that for the first time in his life, his money couldn't buy the one thing he desperately needed, a second chance. A man's legacy isn't written in his bank statements, but in the lives he touched, or in Arthur's case, the lives he failed to touch. By late morning on Thanksgiving, the blizzard outside had settled into a heavy, silent blanket of snow. Inside the private suite, the silence was broken only by the rustling of papers. Mr. Henderson, Arthur's longtime attorney and accountant, sat by the bed, looking apologetic for working on a holiday. I wouldn't bother you, Arthur, but the fiscal year closes next week, Henderson said, sliding a document across the tray table. We need signatures on the charitable trust allocations, specifically the Hope Response Initiative. Arthur stared at the ceiling, his chest still aching. Hope Response? Remind me. I donate to so many tax shelters. It was the anonymous $5 million grant you authorized 5 years ago, Henderson explained, adjusting his glasses. You wanted a write-off to offset the capital gains from the Tokyo merger. It funds emergency medical training for underprivileged youth in the South Side. Arthur scoffed weakly, the ghost of his old arrogance surfacing. Right. Throwing money into a black hole. I assume the funds were squandered by some corrupt bureaucrat. Henderson hesitated. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a glossy brochure. Actually, sir, quite the opposite. The program has become a national model for efficiency. The founder is somewhat of a local legend. He worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on before your grant arrived. Let me see, Arthur muttered, taking the brochure with a trembling hand. The cover featured a group of smiling teenagers in EMT uniforms, standing in front of a new ambulance. But Arthur's eyes didn't look at the kids. They locked onto the man standing in the center, his hand resting paternally on a student's shoulder. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with kind, dark eyes and a smile that radiated genuine warmth. It was Marcus. Arthur stopped breathing. The text below the photo blurred as his eyes watered, but the words jumped out at him. Founded by Marcus Hayes, who believes that every life is worth saving, regardless of zip code. The irony hit Arthur like a physical blow, harder than the heart attack. On national television, he had called his son lazy, dead weight, and a genetic error. Yet here in black and white was the truth. Marcus hadn't just been working. He had been building a legacy of compassion using Arthur's own money Arthur had given solely to save on taxes, while Marcus used it to save lives. He runs this? Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. Yes, Henderson said, oblivious to the connection. They say he personally trains every class. He's saved countless lives, both on the street and in the classroom. The brochure slipped from Arthur's fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dying leaf. The realization stripped him bare. His purity was a lie. His success was hollow. The son he had thrown away was the only one who had actually achieved something meaningful. Shame, hot and suffocating, flooded his chest, washing away 20 years of rationalizations. I called him worthless, Arthur choked out, clutching the bedsheet like a lifeline as tears finally spilled over, while he was busy being the man I never had the courage to be. Snow fell softly on the small, peeling porch of the Hayes residence, covering the imperfections of the world in a blanket of white peace. Inside, the house was a sanctuary of golden light and the rich, savory aroma of roasted turkey and sage. It was a stark contrast to the sterile silence Arthur Sterling had left behind at St. Jude Hospital only an hour ago. Against the screaming protests of Vanessa and the grim warnings of his doctors, Arthur had checked himself out. He had left his Italian suit in the closet, wearing instead a simple wool coat and slacks that felt foreign on his body. He stood now before the chipped green door of the Southside bungalow, his hand hovering over the wood. He was a man who had kicked down boardroom doors his entire life. Yet here, he was terrified to knock. Inside, laughter drifted through the cracks. Jack, Marcus's partner, was loudly retelling a story about a cat stuck in a tuba, while Elena's warm chuckle filled the gaps. Arthur took a breath that rattled in his healing chest and knocked 3 times. Hesitant. The laughter died instantly. Footsteps approached. The door creaked open, revealing Elena. She wore a simple apron over her dress, her hair graying but her face timeless. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked like she had been waiting for 20 years. "Elena," Arthur said, his voice stripped of all its broadcast polish. He took off his expensive hat, clutching it with both hands like a penitent schoolboy. I have no right to be here." "No," Elena agreed softly, her gaze steady. "You don't. I spent my life building a tower so high I couldn't see the people standing at the bottom," Arthur confessed, the cold wind biting at his neck. "But for the last 2 days, I've been starving in a room full of expensive food. I didn't want to be alone today. Not after what I learned." Marcus appeared behind his mother, filling the doorway. He wore a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking nothing like a subordinate and everything like the man Arthur should have raised. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Jack fell silent at the table, watching the impossible reunion. Arthur looked up at his son. "You saved my life, Marcus. But when I saw that brochure, when I realized what you've done with the Hope Response Fund, you did more than save me. You showed me I've wasted my entire life chasing the wrong kind of gold." "I'm sorry, son." The word hung there, son, spoken not as an insult, but as a plea. Arthur waited for the door to slam. He deserved it. He deserved the cold. Marcus looked at his mother. Elena gave a nearly imperceptible nod, her eyes shining. Marcus stepped forward, his face serious. He looked at the man who had cast him out, seeing the cracks in the armor. "Ideally," Marcus said, his deep voice cracking slightly, "we don't turn away hungry people on Thanksgiving. Come in, Arthur." The simple invitation broke something inside Arthur that had been hardened for decades. He stepped over the threshold, leaving the winter behind. They made space for him at the small, crowded table. There was no crystal, no silver, just mismatched plates and faces glowing with a warmth money couldn't buy. As they bowed their heads to pray, Arthur Sterling held the rough, warm hand of his son, finally understanding that the richest man in the world isn't the one with the most gold, but the one with a seat at this table.